You probably know by now that we are staunch supporters of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president. And why? Well, Bobby brings unity, healing, leadership skills like no other, tremendous experience, and most importantly, solutions to the deep problems that plague our nation. Our guest today, David Walker, is in a similar situation. David Walker is the former Comptroller General of the United States under the Bill Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, back when fiscal responsibility was a thing. Okay. And David has been a fierce advocate for fiscal responsibility, both prior to that time and ever since. He's one of the founders and original CFO of the Pete Peterson Foundation. He is also one of the founders of the No Labels Party, which is growing in popularity across the nation, and rightfully so, as we know the two-party system is leading us down a dark path. David's latest book, I believe it's his fourth book, is called America in 2040, Still a Superpower, with a question mark, of course, and solutions that he offers. Very highly recommended reading. So David has a lot of great things to say. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
We are mortgaging the future of our country, our children, and our grandchildren at record rates. That is irresponsible, that is inequitable, that is immoral, and it needs to stop. They're not treating the other side as the loyal opposition, they're treating them as the enemy. And that's not good for our country, and it needs to change. I reminded him that Paul Volcker, who was a friend and a great chairman of the Federal Reserve, referred to me as the Paul Revere of fiscal responsibility. Now, keep in mind, I did that on British television.
If somebody actually wants change, wants to actually alter those issues, they're going to vote for me. We need to be building up and fortifying our democratic institutions.
That's not what the Constitution was written for. It was written for at the times when it's inconvenient.
Welcome to the Curators Podcast, a place for the Kennedy curious.
Hey everybody, it's Paul with the Curators, and I am here with a special guest, David Walker, former U.S. Comptroller General. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you, Paul.
Yeah, I thank you, and I understand that you. I'd like to start out by asking you your work with the Peter Peterson Foundation. I know you're on the advisory board there. That's something that's always interested me. Would you be kind enough to just take a moment and walk us through your work there?
Sure. When I was Comptroller General of the United States, Pete Peterson, who obviously the foundation is named after, may God rest his soul, recruited me to be the first CEO of his foundation. At the time I was Comptroller General of the United States, I was a leading advocate, and arguably am still a leading advocate for fiscal responsibility and sanity in the U.S. And he convinced me that while I had accomplished two of my three objectives at the GAO, I couldn't accomplish the third one there. And that was to get the Congress and the president to agree on a meaningful down payment to restore financial sustainability. Because at the GAO, you can be very aggressive about making recommendations about economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, but the Congress doesn't want you to make recommendations on policy issues, whether it's be spending policy, tax policy, regulatory policy, and frankly, you can't just talk about a problem. You got to show a way forward. So he hired me to be the first CEO. I set it up, put it on the map. He was a great person to work with, very knowledgeable, very dedicated about the issue. I was there about 2.5 years, and then I spun off and created my own not-for-profit called the Come Back America Initiative, because I wanted to deal with a broader range of issues at all levels of government. In other words, federal, state, local. Federal is the biggest problem, but we got a number of states that have serious problems, and a number of localities do too.
Yes, and you wrote that book in 2010, Come Back America, right?
I did, and it was intentionally called the not-for-profit was intentionally called the Come Back America Initiative because I only intended to have it for 3 years. And so that's why I use the term initiative. And one of the things that we did when I was there is we did a 10,000-mile, 27-state national fiscal responsibility bus tour in partnership with others, including Alice Rivlin, may God rest her soul, and funded largely by H. Ross Perot Sr. and we gained 77 to 97% support for specific fiscal reforms that would put our finances in order. By that, I mean budget controls, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, taxes, defense, government organization operations, and political reforms. So I had a hypothesis that the people were ahead of the politicians. They were willing to accept tough choices if they were part of a comprehensive goal-based plan consistent with principles and values that bring people together rather than divide them apart. I proved it. Now what we have to do is deal with the biggest deficit the federal government has, which is a leadership deficit.
Mm-hmm. And then it manifests in a national debt of $35 trillion over a period of years. And we can go into some of the details on that, perhaps. I'd like to spend a moment here playing a little clip, your discussion at the American Legislative
George
Council.
Washington made his farewell address. He issued 4 warnings. They were avoid excessive debt, avoid foreign wars, avoid regionalism, and avoid factionalism. How we doing? Second, Rome arguably was the greatest superpower in history. It was a republic for about 500 years, and then it fell and became an autocracy for another 500 years. Rome fell for several reasons. They included fiscal irresponsibility, political instability, moral decline, an overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Do those sound familiar? We must learn from history and others and take the necessary steps to create a better future. We, the people, are responsible and accountable for what does or does not happen in Washington. In the final analysis, we have 3 choices: to accept the status quo, to quit, or to fight. I choose to fight.
The comment where you were likening America and the perils that we face to the Roman Empire. And I was struck by that. I've heard that from a couple of politicians, including my candidate. And I thought to myself, so much of what we're seeing in the world today is like a reminiscent of what's going on in the Roman Colosseum and all of this discourse and the political dysfunction. And, bringing in what you just said before about, the willingness of people to perhaps take on fiscal responsibility. Where is the problem that isn't being solved? It just seems like there's so much, pandering to political, even this dysfunction in Washington, corporate lobbies owning the political process. Is this a political problem? I think so. What do you think?
Well, I do, but let me remind people what I said with regard to the analogies to Rome. I'm a big believer, Paul, that you have to learn from history and learn from others. And unfortunately, the United States doesn't do a very good job of that. I think the problem that we have is we have too many career politicians. Our founders intended for people to come out of the real world with various different occupations, spend some time doing public service and going back to the real world. Now we have too many politicians that want to make a career out of it, and their number one job is to get reelected. That leads them to being very myopic because there are elections every 2 years. They have tunnel vision. They focus on kind of one issue at a time without understanding the interconnectivity, the interdependency. And then they're concerned about their own self-interest, keeping their job. That combined with the fact that the political parties, the margins between the two political parties, both for presidential elections as well as the Senate and the House, are so close that every election is about control. And that ends up causing people to be even, less willing to work with the other side and, more in a situation where, they're not treating the other side as the loyal opposition. They're treating them as the enemy. And that's not good for our country, and it needs to change.
And that's where I could not agree more. That's personally where I believe the need for an independent candidate emerges, to have that ability for both sides, instead of hurling stones at each other, to actually have a place to land in the middle where they can actually get things done on behalf of the people. After all, isn't that who they're there for? The people, right?
Well, the first 3 words in the Constitution are the most important. We the people. We the people are responsible and accountable for what does or doesn't happen. And as you know, Paul, I'm one of the original national co-founders of No Labels. And we thought very, very seriously about offering a third option unity ticket that was focused on problem solving and focused on solutions. Ultimately the decision was made not to run that ticket because of the concern that it would be a spoiler, because we wanted to be able to make sure that there was a pathway to victory in the Electoral College rather than trying to tip the scales one way or the other. And as you know, 70% of the American people didn't want Biden or Trump. 70% didn't want Biden or Trump. Okay. But the duopoly, meaning the Democratic and Republican parties, have a stranglehold on our system, and that needs to change.
Agreed. And, there have been mile markers along the way. History, you talked about history rhyming, if not repeating itself, and you cited going back to 1913 and the creation of the Federal Reserve and the institution of the tax code and so forth. And, you kind of see this emergence of the U.S. as a superpower in the world post World War II. We have the Bretton Woods Agreement. 1971 to me was a key mile marker in that we go off the gold standard. That seemed to, and you'll tell me your take on this, that seemed to usher in this ability for the government to engage in more deficit spending. The U.S. became the world's only reserve currency, kind of married to its military power. And then, at some point, David, we stopped talking about balanced budgets. The phrase disappeared. What happened?
Well, several things. When we came off the gold standard, we became a fiat currency, just backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. For a long time, people had a lot of faith in the credit of the United States government. I think you also have to keep in mind that the debt ceiling, which was put in place back in World War I, has been a dismal failure. It's become a political football. There's only one other country that even has something like a debt ceiling. It has not constrained the growth of government. It has not constrained mounting debt burdens. It needs to be repealed and replaced by something that will bind current and future Congresses. And in my view, what that is a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt we can take on as a percentage of the economy, which is a pro-growth approach, will require Congress to make tough decisions, but it won't tell them what those decisions are, how much of it is spending constraint, how much of it is revenue enhancement, et cetera. Right now, the U.S. is about 60% of global reserve currencies, but most trade is done in dollars, but that's changing. And if we lose confidence of investors in our ability to put our finances in order, that could change very suddenly. And if that changes suddenly, it's going to hurt us from the standpoint of borrowing cost, trade, and the ability to impose sanctions. And all these were covered in my latest book, American 2040, Still a Superpower ? And by the way, the other thing that's covered is the result of that 2012 10 million a minute tour of what people agreed to as a way to engage in the needed reforms to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability.
How frustrating has it been for you, David? I've followed David Stockman as well. I hear him as a voice of reason, like yourself. I'm not sure how much you and he are aligned. It sounds like you are, but it must be frustrating for you being this incredible voice of reason, trying in a sea of turmoil. What has it been like for you personally?
Well, when I was in London on one occasion, I was interviewed on Hard Talk, which is their #1 political show. And, somebody asked me the host asked me a similar question. He said, do you feel like Chicken Little or, and I said, no, not at all. I said, I love my country. I love my family. Our future is at stake. I still believe there's a way to be able to solve this problem. So I'm going to stay on it, as long as I believe that's the case. And I reminded him that Paul Volcker, who was a friend and, a great chairman of the Federal Reserve, referred to me as the Paul Revere of fiscal responsibility. Now, keep in mind, I did that on British television. So, no, I haven't given up hope. I am frustrated, because we don't have a party of fiscal responsibility anymore. Neither one of the two major candidates, and, obviously, your supporter, RFK Jr., really we're not getting enough attention on what do we need to do to put our finances in order. And that's the number one economic security, national security, international relations, and domestic tranquility threat. If we can't put our finances in order, all those things are going to be adversely impacted, and every American will be affected to differing degrees. By the way, if we lose the confidence of our investors, it won't just be a problem in the United States, it'll be a problem around the world.
Sure. I wonder how much of our so-called asset values and stock market values are actually attributable to the incursion of debt. You can print your way to high asset prices and the illusion of prosperity, but that's always without regard to the commensurate liability on the other side. And that's what I worry about my children and grandchildren, what the world is going to look like that they inherit on the other side of this joyride.
Well, and let me tell you, we are mortgaging the future of our country, our children, and our grandchildren at record rates. That is irresponsible. That is inequitable. That is immoral. And it needs to stop. Our kids and grandkids and future generations are going to face a lot tougher competition in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. On one hand, we have mounting debt burdens. On the other hand, we're reducing investments in their future. That's exactly the opposite of what you need to do to create a better future. And that's why I continue to fight, because I love my country and I love my family.
And David, even the sources of GDP, when we look at them, I would not call it healthy GDP, right? We're spending more and more on military presence around the world. We're spending more money, $4 trillion on healthcare spending, which is chasing chronic diseases that frankly didn't even exist when you and I were young. So this is not healthy spending. This is just spending, and gives us the illusion that our economy is robust. But in reality, it looks like we have this situation where we, the people, are being asked to exchange our health and even years of our lives so that this economic engine can keep churning and corporate profits can keep growing. That doesn't sound very healthy to me.
Well, 70% of our economy is based on consumption, current consumption. All right. And we've got a situation where savings rates are going down, debt burdens are going up. That's the opposite of what it takes to create a better future. And that's, that's what we need to do. We need to recognize reality that to put our finances in order, everything's going to have to be on the table. Not everything is equal. Our fastest growing expense is interest, for which we get nothing. Next year, we'll spend over $1 trillion in interest, for which we get nothing. We're already spending more than defense and Medicare. And within the next couple of decades, it will be the number one expense in the budget, for which you get nothing if we don't change course. So, I think sometimes about the movie Thelma and Louise, where at the end of the movie, they go over the cliff and they're celebrating. Well, we're headed for a cliff, but we're not going to be celebrating if we go over it, I can assure you.
I've made the comment that, one major party wants to lead us off a cliff and the other one wants to drive us into this brick wall behind me. Take your pick.
Yeah. Either way, it's not a good landing.
It's not. And so do you think this ends up with a CBDC?
Let me tell you the things that I think need to be done in order to deal with the problem on the fiscal front. Number one, you have to have a president that will make this a priority. We have not had a president that makes fiscal responsibility a priority since Bill Clinton. He was the last one. And I was Comptroller General of the United States from 1998 to 2008. My first 4 years, we had surpluses. We actually paid down debt 2 of those 4 years.
I remember.
Well, in 2001, the CBO projected that we may pay off all the national debt. And the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, was worried. I testified as well during that time period about it. I said, I'm not worried for a nanosecond because I know how this place works. These projections, among other things, don't adequately consider known demographic trends and rising healthcare costs. And that's one of the frustrations, Paul. Government tends to measure whether they care or not by how much money they spend, not based on the results they achieve. And I'll give you 2 examples. We spend the most per capita on healthcare and the most per capita on K through 12 education. and we get below average results on a global basis. So the answer is not to throw more money at it. Throwing more money at a system that doesn't work is insane. And so we need fundamental structural reforms in a number of areas in order to get us to where we need to be.
A lot of empty promises in those budgets, right? You're the voice of reason, and I would imagine that if that were embraced, you would be part of that solution in Washington. I certainly hope that's the case. Do you think the world is going to perhaps force us back into more of a gold standard? Is that something that other countries are seeking that might threaten the dollar's reign as world reserve currency?
Well, China is actively pursuing the possibility of moving to a gold-backed currency, and there are alliances that are forming against us. One of which is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea that's formed alliance against us from a economic standpoint, a diplomatic standpoint, a military standpoint, and a cultural standpoint. That's being augmented with the BRICS, which are now looking for alternative currency arrangements, even potentially baskets of currencies. And in addition to that, in the UN, you have something called the G77, which are the 77 unaligned countries that are trying to work against, the major powers. And so, these are real. These are serious. We need to take them more seriously. Young people get all concerned about environmental sustainability. The fact is climate change is real, and mankind plays a role in that. And we need to do things differently, but we got to be realistic about how much we can do and how quickly we can do it, right? What people don't understand is we can lead by example, but if China and India and other countries don't participate with us, we can't solve the problem. On the other hand, young people aren't as concerned about fiscal sustainability. They're going to pay the price. They're going to pay the burden if we don't put our act together. And the other thing is, only we can solve the problem. We don't need anybody else to solve the problem. Only we can solve the problem. And if we don't solve the problem, it's going to have adverse global implications. So we really have two big sustainability problems. We have an environmental sustainability problem, and we have a fiscal sustainability problem, and we need to be addressing both.
And, my take is, being involved in the political sphere lately quite a bit, I sense that a lot of young people, they may not know, they don't have the wisdom or the experience that somebody like yourself has, but they do sense the problem. They do understand that there's a burden that's been placed on them. I'm part of the baby boomer generation that's responsible for putting that burden on them. And I want to do right by this younger generation and do the right thing for them. I see, for example, the unaffordability of homes for them as being a major issue, right? In 2020, and I'll ask for your take on this, we printed $4 trillion on the heels of COVID. This is the Cantillon effect or Cantillon effect, where, those closest to the money printing spigot benefit most disproportionately. 99% of that $4 trillion went to the billionaire class, while the rest of us basically got just crumbs, if anything. So proportionately, our net worth in real terms has gone down. Yet most people cannot afford to get their hands on $1,000 in this country in an emergency. So this is some serious stuff here. And, meanwhile, we've got this inflation, what we call inflation, rising prices. Peter Schiff talks about inflation as being of the money supply itself, which I agree with. That's really what, to me, inflation is. Higher prices are more like the consequence of that, right? So this is what the younger generation is experiencing. And so my question for you here is, what does all of this mean to the average voter, David? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first, people need to understand how excessive spending, large deficits, and mounting debt burdens can affect them. And I think one of the things you have to do is you have to link what they're experiencing now with what could happen in the future if we don't defuse this ticking debt bomb. For example, you mentioned about the huge amount of spending that took place. in 2020, 21, and 22. And a lot of that was due to the flawed and failed macroeconomic theory called modern monetary theory that was pushed by the progressives, which says that deficits and debt don't matter as long as you can borrow your own reserve currency until you have excess inflation. Guess what? It was followed in 2021 and 2022. It resulted in excess inflation. But it wasn't just fiscal policy, it was monetary policy. The Federal Reserve, intentionally or unintentionally, left interest rates too low, too long. But in addition to that, they bought trillions of dollars of this new debt. We didn't go to the market to sell it to the market. The Federal Reserve bought it, increased their balance sheet, short-term gain, long-term pain. And so, that resulted in excess inflation. That resulted in, higher interest costs. That's having a serious adverse effect on food costs, transportation costs, energy costs, housing costs, etc. So if you let people understand you're worried about these things, well, this is the cause of that. It's a combination of fiscal and monetary policy. And if we don't get our act together, guess what? It's going to get a lot worse, not better.
I tie it all into, to me, debt is the devil's playground. This is the source of all of these atrocities that we're witnessing in society, not just the chronic diseases, but the societal ills, the vitriol, the depression, the suicide rate. All of that to me is a function of this debt infused mania that has kind of plopped all this money into our laps that should have taken 50, 60, 70 years to kind of grow into and process as a human being, but instead we've kind of like just thrown it in everyone's laps, and it's been like a big giant money land grab.
And Paul, do you know what the largest asset on the federal government's balance sheet is?
My guess would have been land, but you tell me.
Student loans. We have a president who wants to give away portions of the largest asset on the balance sheet, which is, by the way, irresponsible, inequitable, and unconstitutional.
Another word that seems to have been kind of pushed aside when convenient, right?
Oh, yeah. But just so you know, I've got mine right here.
Awesome. I love that.
Always one on my desk, whichever desk I'm at.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of what you're saying are sentiments, especially with the Constitution, that my candidate talks about, especially the freedom of speech and all of the amendments to the Constitution that are so dear to our values as a nation.
Well, and we need more. One of the ones we need, I've already talked about. We need a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on, which will force current and future Congresses to deal with this issue, which is a threat to our collective future. We've got to do that. We need term limits. We need campaign financial reform. We need several things that are going to require constitutional amendments. And there's two ways to get them: the old-fashioned way through the House and the Senate, or a convention of states to propose one or more amendments. And I'm for that, because of the issues that we're talking about, Congress doesn't want to do. They don't want to do it. And the founders were brilliant. They understood that in the future, Congress might become so out of touch and so out of control, or there could be certain issues where they had a conflict of interest, that the states would need to assert their rights. So I'm working on that happening, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Well, I really, truly applaud your efforts, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that sentiment. I'd love to get your thoughts on recent events. Maybe this will be our last topic. Do you have any thoughts on Biden dropping out of the race, perhaps something that should have happened a while ago? Kamala Harris, Trump choosing J.D. Vance. Give us your thoughts on those.
Okay, several things. First, I'm a political independent. And so I make my decisions based upon the person and their platform, not the political party. Okay. Second, in my view, it's not what your age is, It's what your mental and physical capacity is, which varies tremendously by individuals. Okay. In my view, it was clearly evident that Joe Biden was in decline, both mentally and physically. And he was running for re-election, which means he was wanting to be able to stay in office for another 4.5 years. He's not superhuman. It's only going to get worse, not better. So my view is he should not have run for re-election. He should have announced it a long time ago. The Democrats should have had an open primary, if you will. They'd be in a lot better position if they did that. I know they kept your preferred candidate out, which I think was,
you know why, right?
Well, no
because
they don't like competition.
he was going to unravel the corporate capture of the Democratic Party.
Okay, all right. Well,
that was his intention, and still is his intention.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, neither one of the political parties like competition. They also don't like choice, which is one of the things that our country was built on, right? So the answer is, I think he should have dropped out long ago. But on the other hand, I don't think that he should be removed from office to taint him that way. I mean, he's obviously had help doing his job for quite some time. This is not something that's just happened since the debate. With regard to Harris, my personal view is she's not a strong candidate, but they're between a rock and a hard place because they got a lot of money that only Biden and Harris can use. In addition to that, they've got segments of the population that if they don't go with Harris, they're going to have a real problem, especially African American women. So we'll see what happens. I think she'll have a tough time winning if she's the nominee. Who she picks as VP will be important. If I was them, I would pick a governor from a red state or who's a Democrat, or a governor who's from a swing state, or somebody who can attract a different segment of the population that they can't attract, if you will, across the country. J.D. Vance, he's not who I would have picked. I prefer to go for current or former governors. Okay. And there were several people in that category that I think could have fit the bill. Obviously, one of the reasons that he went with J.D. Vance is he's young. He's 39 years old. He's accomplished a lot for his age. He's got a lot of energy. He's also from a part of the country where there are a lot of swing states, and he might be able to help be able to get electoral votes from those states, because as well
Ohio.
Yeah, well, the Republicans are going to win Ohio. The states in the Midwest that are an issue are, in that part of the country are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and there are others that may be in play. But those three are clearly in play. He might be able to help because he's from the neighborhood, if you know what I mean.
Sure. I heard Whitney Webb, one of my favorite investigative reporters, talking about J.D. Vance's ties to the couple of high-level families who may have bankrolled his candidacy a little bit, and the ties to Palantir and the surveillance state. So I'm interested in following on that. Without sounding conspiratorial, I'm going to follow up on that a little bit when I have the time. But listen, this media, they're hell-bent on this sort of binary choice. They love this, what I call the world of rock'em sock'em robots. You remember those, right?
I remember that well. I had one.
Yeah, that one red and one blue, right?
Yeah, I had one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the media thrives on that. Their ratings go up. It's all a profit motive for them, as opposed to, having this civil discourse and rising above that boxing ring and seeking common ground solutions for the people. That's what I'm looking for in a candidate.
Which is what we need. And I would point out that both of our names are in purple, which is the third option, right? I mean, we're not red, we're not blue, we're purple. Look, my concern has been is the presidential race so far has been about the past and personalities rather than the future and policies. And that's what it needs to be about. And I personally believe that we need political reforms as well because today we have a republic that is not representative of nor responsive to the general public. That's what we have. And we have a duopoly who wants to keep it that way because it's simple. But again, as I said before, the United States, among other things, was built upon choice and competition. And I think that's a good thing.
Well said. And you've spoken a lot today, a lot of meaningful concepts that you've brought to us. I think we'll leave it there because I want to be respectful of your time. And I thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Paul. All the best.
Thank you. I hope to speak with you again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Well, you heard it from David himself. A real deficit in leadership in Washington. Both parties looking to blame each other and focusing on the past and not presenting any real solutions. And it's no wonder then that 70% of the American public do not want either party. Whereas Bobby Kennedy does not focus on the past. He uses the past and the lessons of the past to create a better future. That's his platform. I invite you to go to Kennedy24.com and check it out for yourself. Finally, allow me to share this with you. The iconic picture of It's a Wonderful Life. I have long maintained that we have become Pottersville in this country with a wealth disparity that has become grotesque. Bobby Kennedy is George Bailey. He is here to restore us to Bedford Falls. That took a little bit of faith in the movie. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith on the part of America, but I believe in it. I hope you believe in it too. Thank you.